Ever thought about surviving a winter with no heat, no electricity, just pure grit? Medieval peasants did it, and we'll get into the walls made of literal dung that kept them alive. Their raw ingenuity is unreal. We're breaking down their tactics in clear chapters. First, the heating hacks, then the underground homes, then communal sleeping, complete with timestamps. Visual cues and recaps will keep things easy to follow. Picture this: forgetting to stoke the fire and waking up to icy glares from your family. Which of these survival hacks would you dare try? Manure walls or communal spooning? Drop it in the comments. Let's learn from history's toughest survivors and see how they tackled the cold head on. So, let's get into the gritty details of how medieval peasants kept from freezing solid. We're starting with their most shocking heating hacks, and trust me, these tricks are anything but ordinary. How did they manage to stay warm in winters so harsh you'd be begging for a space heater? Their wildest idea might just blow your mind. Imagine living in a time when temperatures dropped below freezing for weeks, with no modern gadgets to save you. These folks didn't have the luxury of flipping a switch for heat. Most lived in small, drafty huts pieced together from whatever was around, and staying warm was a constant struggle. They had to get creative, and their solutions were as practical as they were bizarre. One of their most jaw-dropping methods was using animal dung in their walls. Yes, you heard that right. Manure wasn't just waste, it was a lifeline. They mixed clay, straw, and livestock droppings to create a paste called daub, then smeared it over a framework of woven twigs known as wattle. Once dried, this odd combo formed a tough barrier that trapped heat inside. Here's the crazy part. Research shows these wattle and daub walls provided insulation comparable to early fiberglass. That's the kind of ingenuity modern engineers can't help but respect. You're sitting in a house literally built with poop, and it's the only thing keeping you from turning into an ice cube. Talk about a survival win. Picture yourself in one of these huts during a brutal snowstorm, your breath fogging in the chilly air. The only reason you're not frozen stiff is those dung-packed walls holding in every scrap of warmth. We grumble if our heater lags for a minute, but these peasants turned farm leftovers into life-saving insulation. Archaeologists have found remains of these homes across Europe, proving this technique kept houses way warmer than basic wooden shacks. The mix created air pockets that acted like a natural shield, cutting down heat loss in ways that were pure genius for the time. But they didn't stop at weird wall recipes. Central hearths were the core of every peasant home, and not just for boiling a pot of soup. Placed right in the middle of the house, these fires were designed to spread heat to every corner of their tiny space. Whether it was a rough stone setup or a simple pit in the dirt, the goal was maximum warmth. Smoke often filled the room since chimneys were rare for poorer folks, but they'd take a cough over freezing any day. Studies from medieval village digs show that in 14th century peasant cottages, a single central hearth could sustain indoor temperatures of 50 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit, even during blizzards. That's chilly by our standards, but a huge step up from the icy outdoors. Think about tending that fire all day, knowing if it dies out, the cold creeps in faster than you can grab more wood. It was their lifeline, and they guarded it fiercely. In some homes, they even built raised sleeping spots near the hearth to soak up every bit of rising heat. When your whole family relies on that one flame, you learn to place it where it counts. It wasn't perfect, but it got them through nights that would shatter most of us today. Here's a fun fact. Letting that fire go out wasn't just a small mistake. Wake up to a dead hearth, and your house would be so cold, it'd feel like the frost itself was glaring at you. Everyone had to help out, from kids dragging in kindling to adults banking embers just right before sleep. Old records even mention folks getting blamed for wasting warmth if they messed up. Imagine the tension around that hearth when the temperature plummeted. These heating hacks weren't just odd for the sake of being odd, they worked. Manure walls insulated better than bare wood, and central fires were a smart way to warm everyone. Peasants outsmarted winter with whatever they had on hand, and that's pretty incredible. But they didn't stop at walls and hearths. Stick around, because next we're looking at how they took their fight against the cold to a whole new level. Ready to see their next trick? Let's uncover another layer of medieval genius with their underground housing secrets. You've seen how they battled the cold with clever heating tricks, but now imagine using the very earth beneath your feet as a weapon against winter's bite. These peasants weren't just surviving. They were outsmarting nature in ways that'll make you rethink what a home can be. Winter back then wasn't just tough, it could kill you if you weren't ready. Temperatures plummeted so low that a thin wall meant disaster, and biting winds tore through anything flimsy. Peasants couldn't afford to live in surface shacks that offered no protection when snow buried everything in sight. They needed something smarter, something that used the world around them to keep the frost out. So, they turned to the ground itself, crafting homes that literally hugged the dirt for warmth. What they did was dig their houses partway into the earth, sometimes a few feet down, sometimes deeper. These sunken homes weren't random holes. They were carefully planned to use the soil as a natural heat shield. The surrounding dirt acted like a heavy blanket, trapping warmth inside and keeping the worst of the icy air out. Think about how much we spend on fancy insulation today. Then picture these folks realizing the ground under them could do the job for nothing. That's some serious brain power with just a shovel and sheer will. Picture yourself in one of these sunken huts during a howling storm, the wind raging outside like it wants to rip everything apart. It may feel eerie living in earth walls, but that tight dug-in design was brilliant at holding heat where they needed it. You're in what's basically a burrow, with dirt all around and just a flicker of light from a tiny fire or a narrow window slit. It's not a place you'd show off, but when survival's the game, who cares about looks? These homes were built for one thing, keeping you alive through the deadliest cold. And while the earth kept chill at bay, tiny head-sized windows and low roofs helped lock in every degree. More on that soon. Archaeological finds across Europe, from Britain to the eastern plains, prove how effective this was. Studies show these semi-subterranean houses stayed about 10 degrees Fahrenheit warmer than surface dwellings in winter. That might not seem huge when you've got a thermostat to crank, but when you're staving off hypothermia with only a small flame, those extra degrees could save your life. The Earth's steady temp gave insulation that plain wooden walls couldn't match, turning a simple hole into a stronghold against the freeze. They didn't just stop at digging, though. These peasants tweaked their underground dens with details to squeeze out every bit of heat. Those tiny windows cut down on drafts that'd steal warmth in a heartbeat, and low ceilings kept hot air close to where people huddled or slept. Imagine your home as a tight little bubble, every inch designed to cling to the heat from that precious fire. Big windows or tall rooms? Not a chance. They'd see those as a reckless waste when frost was clawing at the walls each night. Excavations reveal another smart move in how they placed these homes. Some were angled to face the winter sun's path, not just tossed down anywhere. They wanted to grab those faint daylight rays to sneak in a few extra degrees of natural warmth. Think about that. You're out there digging, not just for shelter, but plotting your house's direction to catch every scrap of sun. When you're not sure you'll see spring, every tiny advantage counts. It's a small thing, but it shows how hard they fought to survive, right down to where their door opened. Here's a fun fact to drive this home. Mess up while building, like leaving a gap in the dirt or not packing it tight, and you'd wake up with frost on your face. No pressure, right? A single draft wasn't just a nuisance. It could turn deadly quick. Old tales mention folks checking every inch of their home before the worst cold hit, knowing one crack could ruin everything. You'd be scrambling to fix it before the next storm struck. Let's wrap this up quick. Digging down and sealing tight turned their homes into heat traps. They weren't just hiding from winter. They were using the earth to beat it. Stick with us because there's more to their story of outwitting the cold with the wildest ideas yet. Let's keep exploring how medieval peasants outsmarted the cold with some truly unexpected moves. You've seen their underground homes, but now it's time to check out their creative insulation tactics. These folks faced winter winds that could slice right through their flimsy huts, and they couldn't afford to let even a whisper of warmth slip away. They got crafty with whatever was lying around, turning everyday scraps into shields against the freeze. Trust me, their ideas will make you look at your cozy, insulated walls with fresh eyes. Winter back then was a relentless enemy. Imagine gusts so bitter they whistled through every tiny crack, threatening to turn your home into an icebox. Peasants lived in shelters often made of little more than sticks and mud, barely holding together against a snowstorm. Losing heat wasn't just miserable, it could be a death sentence. So, they scoured their surroundings for anything usable, stuff we'd toss without a second thought, and turned it into life-saving insulation. Modern stuff like fiberglass? Not a chance. They relied on nature's offerings and a creativity that's honestly mind-boggling. Beyond those manure-mixed walls we've talked about, peasants stuffed their homes with all kinds of odd materials to fend off the chill. Straw was a go-to, jammed into gaps between the woven twigs of their wattle frames for an extra buffer against drafts. Moss, pulled right from the forest floor, got shoved into cracks to seal leaks. Even animal hair, scraps from shearing sheep or other livestock, was pressed into action as a fuzzy barrier. Imagine kneeling in the snow, plugging a crack with sheep wool. Your frostbitten hands remind you why every scrap counts. Resourceful is an understatement for this kind of hustle. Picture yourself patching a hole in your wall with a handful of damp moss, the icy air sneaking in as you work. Outside, a blizzard howls, and you're banking on this weird mess to hold up. Compare that to grabbing some caulk or tape today. Our fixes seem downright dull, don't they? But for them, this wasn't just a task. It was a fight for survival. Every bit of stuffing was critical when the mercury dropped below freezing. You weren't sprucing up your place for show. You were battling to keep your family from shivering through another brutal night. Here's why it wasn't as crazy as it sounds. Archaeological digs in a 13th century village revealed that walls packed with moss and animal hair held heat significantly longer than bare wattle alone. Those materials created tiny air pockets, slowing heat loss big time. Warm air lingered inside instead of escaping into the frigid night. Research even shows one village's layered hay insulation cut temperature swings by roughly 2 degrees Fahrenheit per layer. 3 layers meant 6 degrees Fahrenheit of extra stability. That's not much to us, but when your only heat source is a small fire, every degree is a hard-won triumph. What we'd call junk was their treasure. They didn't stop at stuffing walls, though. Peasants hung animal hides over interior surfaces and doorways as added blockers. Think of those thick, rough pelts as their heavy curtains, stopping icy drafts in their tracks. Some used coarse wool blankets, worn and ragged, draping them over openings or tacking them to leaky spots for more protection. Imagine turning your drafty hut into a patchwork of hides and fabric, carving out small, cozy corners where warmth actually stuck around. It was all about layering their space, making sure no cold air slipped through. Evidence from digs shows they didn't just insulate once and forget it. Some families piled on seasonal layers as winter deepened, adding more straw or moss when the real freeze hit. Picture trudging out in early snow to gather extra stuff, knowing harsher days loom, and packing it into your walls bit by bit. They adapted on the fly, treating the weather like an opponent. Finds from village sites across Europe show homes with thicker insulation in stages, proof they kept reinforcing their defenses as the cold dragged on. You wouldn't believe this, but a hole in your wall could land you in trouble with the whole village. Heat was so valuable that wasting it through a gap might get you dirty looks or worse. Imagine neighbors muttering about how you're letting warmth escape, risking everyone's comfort. Old records hint at communal pressure to keep homes sealed tight, since survival hinged on not squandering resources. One lousy patch job could mean extra work for all. Here's the quick takeaway. Odd stuff like moss, straw, and hides turned flimsy huts into heat-holding strongholds. They scrounged whatever they could and made it work against winter's bite. But staying warm wasn't just about their homes. It extended to how they protected themselves every day. Stick around to see their next clever moves for beating the cold. Let's shift gears and look at how medieval peasants armored themselves against the cold with something as basic as their clothes. You've seen their wild insulation tricks for homes, but winter didn't just sneak through walls, it went straight for their skin. Layered clothing systems were their answer, and trust me, these folks turned scraps of fabric into a fortress against frostbite. Their approach will make your fancy winter jacket seem like a flimsy toy. Winter back then was no joke. Imagine stepping outside into a biting wind that could turn your fingers numb in minutes, with damp snow ready to soak through anything thin. Peasants didn't have stores to grab a parka or heated gloves. They faced freezing days where exposed skin was a gamble, risking toes or worse to the chill. Staying warm wasn't optional. It was a daily battle. They had to build protection from the ground up, using whatever they could scrape together, and they got insanely good at it. Here's their secret. They stacked multiple layers of wool, not just piling on random pieces, but crafting each one with purpose. The inner layer, right against their skin, was thin and soft to wick sweat away and keep them from getting clammy and colder. Moving outward, layers grew thicker and coarser, designed to block wind and repel moisture like rain or snow. Some wore up to 5 wool tunics or shirts at once. This strategy could maintain body warmth for up to 6 hours in freezing air, a necessity when there was no indoor heating to run back to. That's clever thinking with nothing but itchy fabric. Picture yourself bundled in 5 rough wool shirts, each heavier than the last, probably reeking after days of wear. Outside, snow stacks up, wind howls, and yet you're warm enough to keep moving or survive the night. Style was irrelevant when frostbite threatened. Every layer was a life-saving barrier. We've got breathable synthetics and heated gear now, but their raw determination to turn scratchy wool into survival gear is something else. It's almost wild to think how little looks mattered when the cold was out to get you. Textile studies on medieval garments reveal a genius twist about their wool. They didn't wash it, and there was a darn good reason. Unwashed wool kept its natural lanolin, a greasy oil that acted as a water shield. Tests on preserved tunics show unwashed wool retained up to 40% more water resistance than cleaned versions. So medieval peasants chose warmth and stayed just a bit smellier. Wet clothes in winter meant freezing fast, so keeping that natural layer was critical. A 13th century text even cautioned that washing your cloak stripped away its power against the cold. They knew better than to trade protection for cleanliness, but they didn't just stack wool and call it a day. Peasants stuffed their clothes with extra bits for more warmth. Dried moss, straw, feathers, even animal hair got shoved into tunics or cloaks to bulk them up. Some moss fought off germs, while others trapped air like a charm. Village records show folks were sent out to gather moss just for this. Those air pockets clung to body heat, making a thin shirt feel more like a thick blanket. Imagine stuffing prickly straw into your vest, praying it doesn't jab you, all for a little extra heat through a long, frozen night. It's messy, but it did the trick. They also tackled wet weather with a slick hack. Rubbing animal fat, often sheep or deer, into outer layers made wool more waterproof, holding up against rain for hours. Some mixed tree sap, like pine, with fat to boost the effect, almost a medieval take on today's sprays. You're out there smearing greasy fat on your cloak, knowing it's your best shot against a downpour turning deadly. It wasn't pretty, but survival rarely is. Here's a fun fact to chew on. Washing winter gear was a huge blunder. Clean clothes lose warmth and water resistance without that lanolin armor. Imagine getting side-eye for scrubbing your cloak in December, only to shiver more than before. Old stories hint at folks laughing at anyone foolish enough to prioritize a fresh scent over staying alive. Survival always won out. Quick wrap up. Layering wool with purpose and stuffing clothes with odd materials turned basic outfits into cold-beating gear. They made fabric a shield when winter raged. But staying warm was only half the fight. Keeping their strength up through the harshest months was just as vital. Let's see how they managed to eat when the world outside was frozen solid. Let's turn our attention to a challenge just as brutal as staying warm, keeping food on the table when winter tries to starve them out. We're diving into medieval peasants' food preservation for survival, and trust me, their tricks will make your fridge look like a cheap toy. These folks couldn't run to a store when supplies ran low. They had to outsmart nature itself to keep their bellies full through months of ice and snow. And they came up with solutions that are equal parts clever and crazy. Hunger wasn't just an inconvenience back then, it was a killer. When winter rolled in, fields froze over, animals barely hung on, and finding fresh food was a pipe dream. Peasants had to stockpile everything they grew or gathered in the warmer months, because a single misstep could leave their family, or their whole village, facing empty stomachs. They turned preserving food into a critical skill, finding ways to make their harvests last through the darkest, coldest days. If they didn't, survival wasn't just hard, it was impossible. One of their best ideas was digging underground pits to store roots and grains. Think of these as nature's own refrigerators, holding a steady, cool temp to fend off rot. They weren't just tossing stuff into holes. These pits, often lined with straw or wood to block moisture, kept carrots, turnips, and barley in better shape than you'd expect. Some villages had over 200 pits for 50 families, 4 natural fridges per household, keeping food cool at a steady 40 degrees Fahrenheit for months. Imagine lugging heavy sacks into a muddy pit, your hands numb, knowing this could be your only stash until spring. That's raw dedication with nothing but a shovel. Picture yourself hauling bushels of turnips into that damp hole you spent days digging, praying they don't freeze or sprout before the thaw. Compare that to chucking leftovers in a fridge today. Our ease feels almost unfair, doesn't it? They check these pits all the time, using their carrots like a rough gauge. Frost damage meant piling on more straw for insulation. Early sprouts meant carving vents for air. Every little tweak was vital when your next meal hung in the balance. It wasn't just storage, it was a lifeline. They also flipped winter's misery into an asset by packing snow around storage spots to keep things chilled. Instead of hating the endless blizzards, they used them as freezers, layering snow in smart piles around pits or above-ground stashes. At one Yorkshire site, snowpack storage held food at 35 to 38 degrees Fahrenheit for weeks after thaw. Natural refrigeration before thermometers existed. Imagine scooping up snow in a storm, packing it tight, and knowing it could keep your food safe until May. They figured out thermal mass without a hint of science books. That's next-level thinking. Beyond pits and snow, they stretched supplies with other smart moves. Fermenting wasn't just for taste. It kept veggies edible for months while locking in nutrients. Manuscripts from 1292 describe root vegetables preserved in brine and feasts of pottage, a stew simmered for weeks that killed bacteria, keeping them alive on simmered calories. They also brewed thick beers from grains, not for a party, but as a calorie kick when solid food dwindled. These brews were so heavy you could practically chew them. Not gourmet, but when you're hungry, it beats nothing. You wouldn't believe how a lousy storage job could tank a whole village. Moldy grain from a poorly sealed pit earned you harsh looks from neighbors, since everyone leaned on shared resources. Manor records show folks catching flack for spoiled stashes. They even ran a grim fool's test, where someone tasted stored food every few days. If they got sick, that gig wasn't a crowd favorite, but it saved villages from bad batches that could wipe out dozens. That's putting the team first in the toughest way. Here's the short of it. Underground pits and snowpacking turned nature into their pantry and keeping food fresh for months. They obsessed over every detail to dodge rot or frost ruining their reserves. But survival wasn't just about having food or warmth, it was about making it through the night when the cold was at its worst. Stick around to see how they tackled that next. Let's zero in on one of the most personal ways medieval peasants fought the freezing nights. We're talking about their communal sleeping strategies, and trust me, this takes survival to a whole new level of close quarters. When the temperature plummeted and darkness brought a bone-deep chill, they couldn't rely on just their homes or clothes to keep warm. They had to use each other, turning bedtime into a group effort to stay alive. Their approach will make your private bedroom setup seem like a wasteful luxury. Winter nights weren't just uncomfortable, they could kill. Imagine the air so cold your breath turns to frost before it even leaves your mouth. And a single night alone in an unheated hut spells disaster. Hypothermia was a real threat, creeping in when you least expected it. Peasants learned quickly that a lone sleeper didn't stand a chance against that kind of freeze. Their solution? Huddle together, sharing every scrap of body heat to fend off the deadly cold. Modern perks like heated blankets were nowhere in sight. They had only their families, and that had to be enough to make it through. Here's how they pulled it off. Whole households, often 6 or more, squeezed onto wooden platforms layered with straw. Forget a comfy mattress with room to sprawl. Picture a crude slab, barely big enough for everyone to press in tight, with scratchy straw as the only padding. They'd stack on any blankets or hides they owned, locking in the warmth their bodies produced. Sometimes neighbors piled in too, if their own places couldn't hold heat. It was all about pooling every bit of warmth possible, turning a brutal night into something they could just barely endure. Imagine this. You're shoulder to shoulder, each breath shared in a human heat furnace. No privacy, but a far better chance in the morning. Personal space? Not even a thought. Survival trumped comfort, and you'd be grateful for every warm body next to you. We grumbled over a chilly room today, but back then, this closeness was the difference between waking up or not. It's hard to wrap your head around, but when the cold was out to get you, squeezing in tight wasn't weird. It was essential. There was real smarts in how they set this up. Archaeologists show these wooden sleeping platforms were built about 18 inches off the floor to escape the coldest air layer and capture rising warmth. That lift, often made with logs or stones, stopped the ground's chill from seeping into their bones. Some platforms were even angled to snag heat from a nearby fire, or placed to soak up lingering warmth from cooking. It wasn't fancy, but it was a clever design with the simplest tools. They knew exactly how to keep heat where it mattered most while they rested. They didn't just flop down randomly either. Families rotated spots nightly, tucking the youngest and oldest, those most at risk, in the center where warmth pooled strongest, surrounded by everyone else's heat. A tougher adult might take an outer edge one night, then switch to give someone weaker a warmer spot. It was like a carefully planned shuffle, making sure the vulnerable got the best shot at surviving. This wasn't just sleeping. It was a team effort to protect each other when winter showed no mercy. You wouldn't believe the lengths they went to enforce this. Some villages had sleep inspectors checking how tightly families packed in, ensuring no heat slipped away through gaps. Manor court rolls from 1289 even fined families for wasting heat by not huddling closely, proof that communal sleeping was a regulated, essential practice. It sounds odd to us, but when warmth was this scarce, they didn't mess around. Spreading out wasn't a quirk, it was a risk to everyone, and they made sure the rules stuck. Here's a fun fact to chew on. One family got dinged with a penalty of extra firewood for the village after leaving gaps in their lineup. Picture the muttering as they dragged logs over, all for wanting a bit of room. Tough? Yeah. But fair when one person's ease could mean less heat for all. Old records show folks shaped up fast after a fine, with neighbors watching to dodge their own trouble. It's a funny mental image, but it drives home how seriously they took staying warm together. Let's tie this up. Packing into shared beds makes body heat a powerful tool against winter's bite. They turned closeness into a calculated defense, enduring nights that would shatter most of us. Now, let's step back and think about what their sheer toughness can show us, even with all our modern ease. Let's wrap this up by reflecting on the incredible resilience of medieval peasants in the face of winter's wrath. Their survival wasn't luck. It was pure ingenuity, from 10 degrees Fahrenheit warmer underground homes to 50 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit central hearths and 40 degrees Fahrenheit root pits. They thrived on smarts, not luxury. Ready to test your inner peasant? Would you bank your fire, build with manure, or spoon your way to survival? Comment below and subscribe if you crave more forgotten hacks. Their tough solutions remind us resourcefulness can outdo technology when it's life or death. Stay sharp, stay curious, and keep pulling wisdom from the past.